Ag Matters is underwritten by Ag West Farm Credit. Ag West Farm Credit is a financial cooperative that provides financing, crop insurance, and related services to farmers and ranchers across the West. From small family businesses to large operations, Ag West brings the experience and financial know-how to help you grow your best future.
Welcome to Ag Matters, covering positive agriculture stories from across Alaska on Big Cabbage Radio.
Hello, everybody. You're listening to Ag Matters. I'm your host, Ken Hoffman. I'm a farmer out in Palmer. My little farm's name is Matsu Microgreens, where we grow, you guessed it, microgreens and other gourmet vegetables you've probably never heard of. Today, we've got Alex Davis in the studio. He is a real vegetable farmer out in the valley. So, Alex, thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
You've said you've been on this program before, but for those who haven't met you, don't know about your farm, maybe you could just start with an introduction about how you ended up in Alaska and how you started farming in Alaska.
Boy, that's a long story. Moved to Alaska in 1997 to go to Alaska Bible College when it was in Glen Allen. And I spent 4 years there as a student, graduated with a bachelor's, met my wife my senior year. We got married after I graduated. And then after she graduated with her bachelor's, we moved down to Palmer to help out on the family farm. She's originally a DeVilbiss. So we moved down to Lazy Mountain and started helping out with her brother-in-law on the vegetables that he was growing. And eventually he's like, I'm too busy to do hay and vegetables. Do you want to take over the vegetables? And I said, sure. I love hard work and beating my head into the wall. So I've been doing it ever since. That's been about 22 years.
Wow. So you're related to the DeVilbisses, who are famous hay producers.
Yep.
And do you help out on the hay farm as well?
Yeah, everybody in the family helps out on the hay farm. So I'm old enough where pretty much I just drive tractor anymore. I don't get paid enough to break my body, so I don't do a lot of hay bucking anymore. But we'll do that for our own animals. Load up the trailers and stuff that for what we need for our critters. But I do a lot of tractor driving when it comes to the hay time, and then my kids and my wife, they're bucking and stacking, and we'll do it until our bodies break.
Yep.
Just part of lifestyle.
Yeah, I've done my share of hay bucking, and I think I'm good. Yeah, it's not easy.
No, it's like, boy, we should train for this. I'm like, okay, go grab a 50-pound bale and lift it 1,000 times a day. I don't know how else to train for it.
Exactly. In the itchiness, you can't prepare for that.
Mm.
Yeah, so tell us more about the vegetable farm. So how many acres is it, and what crops do you mainly grow?
We do about 4 acres of vegetables a year. Our main crop is carrots, but we've also got a good stand of potatoes that I get help on from my nephew, and do a lot of broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, a lot of stuff that keeps really well. I've done year-round marketing probably 16 years. So we developed into a capacity where we could supply people year-round. I'm about as small as you can be and make that work, if that helps to categorize. I'm basically a really large truck farm, so I'm not trying to make all my money in 7 weeks during the summer. I elongate it a lot. We just ran out of orange carrots last week. And
oh, wow.
So we do a lot to keep it rolling, and we're very space intense as far as storage. I've got a root cellar, and we fill it to the ceiling and wash it as we need it.
It's quite unique sounding, because I would say that you have a medium-sized farm here in Alaska, and a lot of the small farmers, they either specialize in summer vegetables, like you were saying, the really intensive, your fresh crops, like your broccoli, your cauliflower, your radishes, or they specialize in storage crops, and you're doing both.
Yeah, and part of that's just doing, farmers markets was kind of how I cut my teeth. I was running an acreage with my brother-in-law, and selling whatever was fresh that we were picking in the morning or the evening before. So sugar snap peas, lettuces, all sorts of stuff, and we've kind of continued that on, but. Some things come and go, but, like carrots is I think probably volume-wise, it's probably 60% of what I grow is just carrots. And so, they're not weather temperamental the way a lot of, like sugar snap peas and green beans are. You get those while you can, but I've never been a huge fan of like, let's put all of our eggs in the bean basket because it'll rain or it'll be a drought. One way they're not growing and the other way they're covered in mud. So,
Yep.
it's like, you got to be really, really careful about how you develop stuff.
So the carrots seem to be the most consistent for your farm?
Yeah, I mean, your broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, those things never fail. But they do, I know at my place they do carry other risks like being eaten by moose. The upside with carrots is they hide their veggies, so the moose don't know to eat them. I've seen moose go right down a broccoli row and take a bite out of every head. Then you lost that week's crop. So they're not my friends during the summer, that's for sure.
Yeah, no kidding. You do a lot of carrots. Do you harvest them by hand, or do you have a tractor to help harvest?
So we are not very mechanically intensive. So like what we do is I've got for planting, I've got 3-row set Planter Junior. These planters were state of the art probably 80 years ago. And I put them on a toolbar, and that gives us our 3-row set. All of our spacing's correct. And then when we go to harvest at the end of the year, we've got a big box blade that goes on the back of the tractor, and it's like a rolling earthquake. But after they've been loosened up, it's all handwork. So it's if you're pulling them out of the ground and it's wet, you break a lot of carrots if you're just hand pulling them. But if we're doing just a small set for market, we'll typically do it that way. When it's time to like harvest, we'll lift a 400-foot bed, and then we'll spend the next 4 hours putting them in buckets.
Yep. So you harvest throughout the summer, and then do you do your main harvest after a frost?
Yeah, I will raid carrots mid-August, sometimes a little earlier if it's a really good grow year, and then usually like the time frame that was beat into me when we started doing this was get your potatoes out by the 1st of October and get the carrots up by the 15th of October. And so you usually do a very intensive week of potato harvest in the end of September. And then depending on what the weather looks like, we will go really hard like October 2nd, and we'll just do carrots till we're done doing carrots. And then usually it warms up and becomes a really nice October at the end. And you're like, why did I pull them so early? And it's like, because I've had years where they got frozen to the ground on October 17th. That's why we pull them early.
And then the potatoes, are you doing those mechanically as well, or are you the same way as carrots?
It's similar. We were able to get a potato digger, but it pulls them out of the ground, but it dumps them back on top of the ground, so they're easier to find. But it's still bend over back labor. It's not, they're not rolling up a conveyor belt and into boxes to be graded and stuff. I mean, there's a lot of really neat toys that are out that'll grade as you go, but it also takes a lot of money to do that, and when you're doing an acre and a half of potatoes, that's not cost effective.
Yeah. So, we're listening to Ag Matters. A lot of our listeners some of them are farmers, most of them are gardeners, and so maybe you could give us some tips and tricks on carrots. I know a lot of folks have issues with the germinating carrots. Do you have any advice for folks that have issues germinating their carrots? Do you think it's variety? Do you think it's soil? Do you think it's planting depth? What do you do?
We do our soil prep. We put our lime down, our fishbone meal, and whatever other amendments we need. We run a rototiller. We've got one tractor big enough for the rototiller that we use for ground prep. Any other tractor on the farm, the rototiller would just shove the tractor down the field. So we run that at about 8 inches of depth. When I first started to farm, all my carrots had right angles. They would go down about 6 inches and take a hard right. And so we broke up the hard pan with a big chisel plow that came out of the woods somewhere on the farm. And that thing will go down 2.5 feet or so. And so that broke the hard pan. So now I have straighter carrots. But if people have carrots that like stub out at like 4 inches, or they'll turn right or left. It's usually because they have a hard pan issue. So you have to figure out how to break that up, whether that's with like deep tines with a pitchfork or something. But that's usually, or you can, if you're doing raised beds, you can just add more humus matter to it and it'll be fine. But that's a big part of that part of it. But as far as germination, a lot of that is making sure your seed company is reputable. Big question would be, are you using pelletized seed or not? Because pelletized is awesome, but it takes a week longer because the clay's got to dissolve off the outside of the seed. And so that can affect a lot as far as how fast are my crops coming up or how big are they going to be on the other end. Because when you short yourself a week, that's fairly dramatic. We'll run the rototiller, and then usually the next day we're out there planting carrots. We do weed burning for our initial weeding, and so we'll put plexiglass down on portions in the field, and so it's like a little micro greenhouse, and you move the plexiglass, and when your carrots have germinated and just emerged, you go out with a flame weeder and we torch the whole field. And it takes us about 2 hours. And then we don't have any weeds that pop back up for another 14 days. And so by the time the weeds pop up and get going, your carrots are already out of the ground for about 13 days. And they're, 1.5 2 inches tall. And then it's really hard for the weeds to catch up. Before we used to flame weed, it was like hunt and peck through the chickweed to find the carrot. And it was very slow, very laborious, and very frustrating when you have more than 50 feet of carrots to do.
Yep, weed mitigation is very important. I do something similar on my little market garden as well. I try to get all of the weed seeds to germinate. I then flame weed, or I just use a rake because my garden's so small. Rake them up, and then I plant the crop. So, yeah, very similar.
Yep. Yeah, a torch from those goes a long ways.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So let's talk a little bit about potatoes. What are your tips and tricks for gardeners that they could maybe take home about potatoes? I know in my garden we had issues with scab. What do you think would decrease scab for gardeners?
I'm the wrong guy to ask about that. I have scab that pops up all the time, and it is relentless, and it is frustrating. And the upside with scab is it just makes your potato ugly. It doesn't make it a bad potato. So, and I'm a big fan of like eat the uglies, so it's, it doesn't mean there's something wrong. It just, it affects marketability. But for a home gardener, I would not worry about scab. Typically, you can treat it with adjusting your pHs. I haven't found a good way that is kind of in the organic vein to do that on a large scale. We've just we've lived with it, and we figure out kind of where the less scabby places are, and we try to plant potatoes there. But it doesn't always work out. And some potatoes are naturally more resistant to it. But, is that a potato you like to eat? And for a home gardener, I wouldn't grow anything I don't like to eat. That's just silly. So you want... but like French fingerling potatoes are usually more scab resistant. Peanut potatoes, we don't get a lot of scab on those. So there are varieties that are more resistant to it. But, like Yukon Golds, it's almost like a magnet. And the problem is those are a really good potato to eat. So, that's a hard thing to figure out. I would do some soil samples and ask for recommendations from whoever you have test your soil. Let them know what the disease issues are that you're facing, and usually they can come up with a plan that works okay, but you got to follow through with that too. So you grow a large variety of vegetables. Yes. In your experience, if you could grow one vegetable, make your living off of it, like it's just drop dead easy to prep for, to plant, to harvest, what vegetable would that be? Like a gardener who wants to start gardening and just wants to have some success, what vegetable would you recommend? I would stick with a cole crop. I would do broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, Brussels sprouts. You got to be careful about the moose, but other than that, I've never had failure in those type of crops. They love this type of our weather up here. That's not a big problem. I mean, like you can do squash, but for us, it's always been a crapshoot as far as profitability, because if it's a cold, wet summer, you're lucky to get, 400 pounds of squash out of 200 plants. And if it's a hot summer, you're lucky to have enough room in a truck to get rid of it all. So if you want to bless your neighbors by drowning them in zucchini, that can be a good way to go if it's going to be a warm summer. But you never know in May when you plant if it's going to be a warm summer or not. So that's part of why we do a lot of diverse crops, is because we just never know in May what it's going to look like in June, July, August. So it's nice to have a variety of stuff where there's always something to eat. And, there's different ways to handle it. You could do a small hoop house or a solarium on the side of your house and grow that way. And, especially for a home grower, that's a nice way to do things. And I started out with an atrium on the side of my house, and that was where I did all my starts initially. We never really grew any crops in there to try to get to market. But that was how I did all my starts, because, it's like, I'll just heat it. I'll heat that end of the house with the house and the sun coming in from the south side. And that worked really well. And eventually I started growing too much for that, and I had to build a greenhouse. There's different ways to skin a cat, but, your greenhouses, hoop houses, solariums, pick your poison on what's good. If people are trying to store stuff, there's a great book called Root Cellaring. And it'll tell you how to retrofit a root cellar into a cold spot in your garage or under a staircase, whatever, and then you can get more length out of your grow season.
Well, cool. Tell us a little bit about your farmers markets. Where do you sell during the summer? Where do you sell during the winter? How can people find your produce?
Well, I've been in kind of a weird phase. I used to be in Anchorage 3 days a week, year-round, and I ran my own market back in those days. But after COVID, I only had one farmer come back to join me for a market, and so I kind of got frustrated by that. So the last couple of years, I've been at the Anchorage Farmers Market on Saturdays, and I got a deal where I've been growing food for communities off the road system. And so I actually run in Anchorage a couple times a month and ship food to a couple different villages. And so I've kind of stepped out of doing the farmers market thing year-round. It got to the point where I felt like I couldn't avoid a snowstorm in the winter. And so, I'd trudge in Anchorage at 6:30 in the morning. I'd be lucky to get home by 9 at night. And after 13 years of doing that, it kind of got the better of me. Currently, we supply Bush's Bunches, and I send a lot of stuff to the Matsu Food Bank and help feed the community those ways. And then been sending stuff out to a couple of remote villages.
Cool. That's great. Do you have any exciting plans for summer 2026? Any new vegetables, any new projects, or are you just trying to survive the summer?
Well, right now I'm trying to be patient because this weather is not helpful. I feel like I've been stuck in the house all of March because whenever I go outside, I get sandblasted. And I've got a new greenhouse that I built, and I need to put the skin on it. And every time I think it'd be a great idea, the wind kicks up and it's like 60 miles an hour at my house. So I'm like, I'm not putting the skin on yet. I don't know when I'm ever going to thaw the ground. And I've got a new transplanting system that we'll be getting up here in April, and we're trying something different. As our kids have gotten older, the conversations become how do we make the farm function and work with less help. And so we're trying to get our transplanting down to 3 people instead of 7. That will take the bite out of it as my kids grow up and leave.
Yeah. What kind of transplanting system? Is it a paper pot?
I did paper pot last year. I bought 2 of them and we put them on the toolbar, and we really liked some aspects of it and we didn't like some other aspects of it. For a small, like in a greenhouse, I think, or hoop house, I think they'd be awesome. And that's kind of where they shine anyway. We started sugar snap peas and green beans in them. And so we did those as transplants, first time ever. And so we had those things available at markets probably 10 days earlier than we typically did. And so that part was cool. But we found that if there's any part of the paper pot that's actually exposed, it dries out real quick. And so it was drying out our root mass. And so things needed to be significantly damper than what my field was, half the planting days that we did last year. So this year we are bringing up a water wheel. And it's like a big wagon wheel, and one guy drives a tractor, 2 people can plant, and every place that gets planted gets about a cup of water put into it, and then you plant straight into the mud. But then everything is wet for at least that day, or probably 2 or 3, and it's upright, because my old mechanical planter, half of our plants are getting planted upside down, so we'd have to flip them all, and it was just a lot of tedious work. We're trying to go, it's weird because it's like we're going lower tech, but it'll be more precise. So that's, it's kind of weird to think of like, let's just go to an old wheel. But if it gets the job done well, and it's not a hugely expensive system to get into. So, I'm looking forward to trying that out.
Well, that's exciting stuff. Are there any final words that you have for our listeners about, farming, what you're planning to do, just anything, any final words?
I would encourage people, especially your home gardeners and even farmers that are listening. I've spent a lot of years farming, almost half my adult life now, or half my actual life, not just my adult life. But when you have excess, there's lots of food banks, food pantries around the valley that could use support and help. We've done a lot at Matsu Food Bank. Back in the day, I had the Anchorage Food Bank come into farmers markets at the end of the day to see what we were all long on. And because when we're all all of us farmers are harvesting, it's like, here's the avalanche of cabbage, and what you didn't sell today, you don't necessarily need in 3 days because you got more coming. And so, it's a great way to get things utilized out in your community is to donate to food banks and food pantries, because unfortunately there's always people that are hungry and in need. It's a great way to dispose of it if you don't have a neighbor that is willing to take more zucchini from you, because eventually your neighbor will stop answering the door.
Yeah, no, that's super true, and that's a great plug. I do a similar thing with even the microgreens. They're willing to take our microgreens.
Yep, I've seen them at the Matsu Food Bank. So. Yep.
No, it's a good thing to do, and I prefer doing that over throwing good, tasty produce in the compost pile.
Well, and I used to throw it in the woods for the moose, and then I got pigs, but I'm like, it's still people food. I grew it for people. It's of quality for people. I'll feed the pigs the stuff that's not quality anymore. And so, we've kind of gotten more and more into providing for food banks. We've been really consistent working with different food banks, I don't know, probably 6-7 years now. That's been part of our normal rhythm anymore is moving stuff that way to just feed people.
Yep. Well, that's great. People are so appreciative of that. And so thank you for what you're doing. And thank you for giving some of your time to come on today's program and to talk to us and to give some tips and tricks to the gardeners that are listening.
Yeah, not a problem.
All right. Well, thank you, Alex. And thank you, everybody, for listening to Ag Matters. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Ag Matters, covering positive agriculture stories from across Alaska on Big Cabbage Radio. Ag Matters is a production of Radio Free Palmer, recorded at our studios in Palmer, Alaska. For more information about this program, email manager@radiofreepalmer.org.